Welcome back to another episode of Conscious Caregiving with L&L, where we're tackling the tough conversations. As always, I am joined by my esteemed colleague and co-host, Lori La Bey. Welcome, Lori.
Well, hi, Lance. I'm thrilled to be here as usual, and I'm really, really excited for this conversation today. The world is on such a fast pace, and a lot of people are even withdrawing from the news because of the levels of stress that it's causing them. But I've been talking more and more with my senior peeps, of which I'm one of. I'll let you know. I'll be 66 in a couple of months. Um, and all of these government policies that people think aren't a really big deal are an absolutely massive deal. And not only are they affecting the pocketbook, but the mental health, which, and the stress levels are getting so high. I'm just worried more and more people are it's going to increase their needs when things are getting cut back. And so I really kind of wanted to talk about some of these things because, the news kind of covers the big broad picture, but it doesn't bring it back home to how does this really affect our seniors? And when it affects our seniors, it affects our families,
Right.
which then affects everybody. And I just it just saddens my heart to see the angst out there right now. And I don't know if you're seeing it too, or if I'm just living in my own little bubble.
No, I definitely think it's out there. I'm going to just briefly give an example, something called Social Security. We hear about Social Security all the time. I know growing up, I would hear my parents or my grandparents say they hope Social Security's there when I get to be that age. And that causes immense anxiety, especially for our seniors. Some maybe didn't work outside of the home. They were a homemaker, or, their spouse passed away, and, they're going to have a very fixed income because they lost that pension and that extra income coming in through retirement. And, one of the recent changes, Lori, when I was preparing for this topic today, the recent changes have altered how and when seniors can access these benefits. So one of the examples that I was going to share is there's a new rule requiring most applications to be made online or in person rather than by phone call, which creates more barriers for seniors that have mobility issues or maybe they aren't familiar with how to use the internet. There's about 6 million seniors could face a 45-mile trip just to get to their Social Security office, eliminating a crucial method of service for many. It just compounds. There's so many different things that we're going to talk about today, but that one really stood out. With our company, we help a lot of limited mobility seniors, shut-ins, people that can't, have any of their own transportation. They rely on us, or maybe they're using another company. But something as simple as, their Social Security needs, they now have to either go in person or do it on the internet. I know my grandparents never owned a computer. I'm sure a lot of seniors don't really have an internet ready computer in their home, which just creates more frustration and limitations for them.
Well, and on top of that, you had mentioned 45 miles. I've heard even larger numbers, especially if people are rural.
Right.
And, some people aren't mobile. Hello. That is not possible for them to even do. I have a family member who is mobile but has limited mobility, could not stand in line for any period of time. And just here, when I signed up, you can't really make an appointment. A lot of these are walk-ins. And I knew to get there early. The doors opened at 8, so people started lining up at 7:30. He could not wait even 30 minutes
Right.
for that. And not everybody has, a little walker with a seat on it, or someone who can bring them there in a wheelchair. I mean, and then when you add, like you said, the internet on, people don't feel safe on the internet. I
Right.
mean, everything is getting hacked, and so now you want that used even more when you have not proven that you're a secure place for them to go. Um, and then what really breaks my heart, which you had mentioned with your grandparents, was they worked all their life. They planned all their life for this money to come to them that they put into it, and now people are going to be cut out of it. potentially for just a snafu. And I have a really hard time with, I heard one senator, and I can't even remember the name, who said, well, my mom, it wouldn't bother her if she missed a payment. Well, you know what? There's a lot of people that need that payment
Right.
every single month, and they rely on that payment.
Yeah. It's figured
And,
into their bills.
and then with the staffing cuts, it's going to take longer to get through. There's just so many variables that it's like it's not just a chop and drop. In my opinion, that is not how we should be functioning. And I know there might be a lot of people that don't like me saying that, and I don't really care.
Right.
But we have to look after our people, and we have to look deeper at procedure, not just concepts and budgets and what we think. I mean, how one of the questions I have, and I know I've heard this from a ton of seniors too, is how are they even making these decisions in such a short period of time? How have they actually analyzed from top to bottom how these departments even function and how their services are used and why they're in place? When I was in management years ago, working for a company, one of the things that I personally loved was their philosophy of keeping the history of why policies were in place. So even when someone was transitioning, that information was gathered, it was taught, it was shared. And when you have brand new people coming in making decisions that don't have a basis, and this isn't political. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. It just seems to be thrown in our faces a lot right now. But this is just something for all of us to think about
Right.
in terms of these changes. And this can happen. These types of things can happen within our families too, where maybe the adult children just decide they're going to make a decision. Mom's going to move, but there's no thought on comfort and safety and positioning of things and items and prioritizing and letting them be involved in that process. That can cause just as much stress as well on that. But yeah, the Social Security is a big hovering thing, and the media, in my opinion, isn't overly helpful,
Right.
because I keep seeing these pings that this has changed immediately, and that's the messaging that's coming out. It's changed immediately, and it's kind of like, well, don't they have to send me a letter? Don't they have to give me notice? Don't they have to? Is it up to me to have to search the internet to figure out what my benefits? I mean, it's very confusing and it's upsetting. And I know I even get pulled into that sometimes and go, no, they do have to give notice of these changes. And I would like to think that that would still be in writing.
Right. Absolutely. And if that wasn't bad enough, I'm going to go to Medicare. Medicare's another big one that, everybody relies on, unless you have a government job. Like my father did not get Medicare because he had a government job, but the average majority of people, they will receive Medicare when they're of age. And there's funding uncertainties and administrative changes there right now too, which may limit access to care or increase the out-of-pocket costs to seniors. And cuts to Medicare or delays in extending improvements can make it a lot harder for seniors to afford necessary treatments and their medications, which kind of ties into the tariff conversation. Increased tariffs on medical equipment and prescription drugs can drive up the cost and directly impact seniors' health and their finances and their access to health.
That's very true. And I love where they're like, oh, these medications have been reduced. Okay, so that's like a nano, percentage of all the medications that are out there. And these are things that not just families, but, or not just seniors, but families in general are being affected by this. And I know, again, for me, a novice with the whole Social Security thing, because I just kind of started it. I'm still feeling my way through. But I go to pick up medications for family, and I never know how much they're going to cost because it keeps changing and the policies changed, and they're like, no, they don't cover that drug anymore. And then I have to go back to the doctor and find out, okay, what is covered in the insurance company, and then get that redone. And and then make up all new med sheets for the people that I'm caring with and try to get them to understand terminology. And yeah, for one couple, I don't even tell them the name changes anymore because it's too confusing. So we just call it the old name because it's a generic that's being covered, and but it's very, very confusing in terms of all the levels. I think of when I worked in uh, this was years and years ago with the developmentally disabled. And I had heard that they were going to cut out anything that wasn't medically needed. Well, a lot of these people are living independently and they need some extra help if it's with cleaning or what management, whatever it might be. And I'm just thinking, are those things going away? Does that mean everyone's going to be institutionalized again? I mean, what's the deal? What's the end goal here? Do they? I mean, and I hear this. I don't believe this, but I hear a lot of seniors say, "Do they just want us dead? Is that the goal?" I mean, that's how they're feeling, and that's a huge shift.
That's a big, yeah, absolutely. Well, and we're talking about these issues right now, and I think it's fair to say, at least for myself, I don't think I fully understand what's going to happen, what's not going to happen, what's just bluster, and what is actual, reality. Imagine now being a senior who's not involved in the healthcare industry, who isn't, tech savvy, who, maybe is a little cognitive decline going on, and them trying to understand and comprehend all of this. I mean, the anxiety that it must induce has got to be just so traumatic, And one thing I was going to say about all that is, but yet we don't hear about any of the effects. We hear about effects on, the markets and our industry and trade, but we're not hearing any really direct effect or implications on our vulnerable population of seniors and people with severe health issues. That hasn't been discussed that I'm aware of.
Well, and the ripple effect is not just them. So if you're caring for somebody and you're hearing about, oh my gosh, this is going up, this is getting cut, they're scrambling and their minds are not shutting down at night. So now they're losing sleep. They're trying to get a hold of their financial planners to pull money out because they're not trusting the markets. I mean, the levels of all of this are so massive. And if we lose our caregivers, and we know stress kills, then we're really going to have some issues,
Right.
in terms of who are taking care of all these vulnerable adults, because they're not all in, assisted livings or nursing homes or wherever. Many are living at home.
Right.
And that, supposedly is where everyone's leaning, is how do we let them live at home longer? We're kind of shooting that whole concept in the foot, in my opinion, in a lot of ways, by the environment that we're dealing with and that we're creating. And things like I heard, like, again, this stuff comes up in some of my support groups, is they're cutting fire and police and EMT funding. Well, they call them when someone falls to help them get them picked up and off the ground, or when there's an emergency to feel safe. And, are they going to be there if they have a fire or, a health emergency? Those things weigh heavy on people's minds.
Absolutely. Well, and a lot of people pick homes and communities based on their emergency services and access to them. If you live in a community that has one fire truck and one police officer and one ambulance, you may look in a different community that has better support services. If you have children or somebody, that's vulnerable or has, declined health needs, you want to have that safety net there for any sort of situation. And underfunded EMS services are already struggling to keep up with inflation and rising costs, leading to these shortages and reduced access for seniors.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Well, and the other thing, now we've got the colleges that are getting attacked for funding in the DEA. No one's looking at the staff ramifications and the education of the next level coming in create these jobs. We're short on doctors, we're short on gerontologists. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. We're having a hard time, like you said, with police and fire and EMTs, our nursing staff, our direct care on the ground staff. And, what are the ramifications of all that going to be? There's talk of these shortages, and now we're going to make it even more difficult, along with cutting research, for cures, not only for our seniors, but for all of us.
Right.
And then that's going to cut jobs. Again, gets back to the money of how do I survive with all of this? And seniors have kids they worry about too. They've got grandkids they worry about. So, and I'm not saying they're the worry stone for the world, but they really do worry about all of these things.
Absolutely. Sticking with Department of Education right now, and it's really programs for all ages. And, reductions in the funding for educational programs can limit access to lifelong learning, adult education, and intergenerational community programs. I know of several of those in our community that keep seniors engaged and mentally active. I mean, we talk about this, and I surely know you do all the time on Alzheimer Speaks. Staying active, staying engaged, staying mentally stimulated is so helpful for dementia. It's so therapeutic. It has a lot of benefits, but cuts to college funding can also affect programs that directly serve or employ seniors, such as like community education or research initiatives focused on aging. That's one of the things, one of the doctors that I follow on LinkedIn talks about all the time. We're cutting all this funding for this research and all of these programs. We're not just affecting the person with dementia today, but we could be possibly affecting the person that will have dementia 1 or 2 generations from now, because you're losing all of that research. And, it takes a long time to get DEA to sign off on a drug to be safe and therapeutic. You're losing all that you've gained and going back to, square one.
Yeah. And it's not that like FDA doesn't need some reform. It's not like the IRS doesn't need some reform.
Right.
Reform is different than gutting programs and not knowing the programs you're even gutting and the effect that it's having. And like I said, that's what really frustrates me. I am not hearing that these are really thoughtful processes by knowledgeable people that understand the programs.
Mm-hmm.
And again, maybe it's the media and how it's being brought to us, where people who don't agree with just focusing on the money are let go.
Right.
And that's not how we've operated. I mean, to me, America operated out of service. Yeah, we were independent and building all these businesses and building the wealth, but it was wealth for all, at all levels, and taking care of the less fortunate. And now it just seems like it's turned its head. I mean, even little things like, funding cut for roads and bridges and transportation. These are critical items for our seniors and for all of us in general,
Right.
to be able to even get to work or to be social. I loved when you talked about the social aspect, because to me, that is the number one thing that gives us purpose, gives us a sense of community. And, when you look at like the blue zones and things like that, yeah, they look at what people eat and they look at their schedule. But to me, what stands out the most is that social interaction, that belief that they're involved. It reduces the mental illness and the depression that can spin off in so many different ways. And we just seem to be creating more of that for people. And the answer is not a pill. I mean, that's no matter what people say, pills are not doing the trick. We have more people taking pills, for depression and different forms of mental illness. And we have more mental illness than we've ever had.
Right.
And I think it's because of the social disconnect. we're texting and we're playing video games, and we're isolated even if we're engaged. We feel like we're engaged, but we're engaged with a thing.
Right.
We're engaged with the process. We're really not engaged with the people.
Right. And I think that ties into, seniors' well-being overall. I feel like a
Mhm.
lot of times they don't want to be a bother. They don't feel like, the grandkids maybe want to be around them, or, a lot of their friends tend to, pass on. They might be one of the last few left. You know, it's such a deadly combination, the isolation leading to the depression, then you're leading to poor nutrition, inadequate sleep, no mental stimulation. It's a recipe for disaster, and that's like with the Department of Education cuts. That's one of the things that really stood out to me was, I know of several intergenerational programs where you might have Mrs. Jones who lives alone, but yet maybe every Thursday or whatever it is, one or two or more of the college kids pick her up, and then they go on an outing, and it's part of their curriculum, but it's also part of Mrs. Jones' therapy, and a lot of things are going to be missed, and I think there's going to be catastrophic results because of it.
Yeah, I so much agree. And we have where even the seniors get involved with the kids' daycare, and just the joy and stuff that brings. What I am hearing and feeling and sensing from people in healthcare at all levels is everything is on hold. And they are slashing their budgets for staff, for nutrition, I mean, you name it, for their education and awareness. I mean, all of those things are critical pieces. And that's really scary.
Yeah.
That's really scary from a professional in the industry to be seeing seeing things get locked up, and people afraid to talk because, if they and even, when we did this, I thought, should we do this? Or are we going to get attacked? And we might, but I'm to the point now where the heck with it. These things need to be discussed. And they are important, intricate pieces of our society, of who we are as people, how we have always lived, and how we want to help one another. The prescription drugs, the immunizations, all of that stuff is getting confusing. To things that people believed in all their lives with science is now being said, no, that's not true. And so people are questioning, what is reality?
Yeah.
Who do I trust? And when you don't feel safe to trust, that's a really dangerous thing as well.
Yeah. It's almost like a pandemic, but without the virus,
Yeah,
Yeah.
a cultural
Cultural
pandemic.
pandemic. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, that I think we really all have to think about. And I would love to hear from our listeners. What are you hearing out there? What are you feeling? What are you seeing? I think it's really important that we have these discussions and not be afraid to talk about them. And what are some workarounds? Some of the workarounds I'm seeing with people are looking to collaborate with others that they never would have touched before,
Yeah.
because everyone was so siloed. And now they're like, oh, we need help. We've got to do something different here. But it's even pulling in volunteers is scary, because you need someone to be able to coordinate and educate, and follow through with all those things. You can't just pull somebody in off the street to fill a job. You can't just say, well, if these people are deported, there's a whole nother line of people who are going to come in and fill that job. That's been proven wrong. That's why other people are filling those jobs. So again, I want us to be safe, but I want us to be able to live dignified lives where we're not scared, and where we do support one another, because I think people at all different levels bring different things to the table. And to me, and again, maybe it's just me, that enriches my life. That makes it better. it gives me a better understanding of big picture, um, and I think there's a lot of comfort in that.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. I know, I look at, if the college programs stop, I know the school my kids go to, during the holidays, the classes will all go over to a nursing home. They'll go to assisted living. And it's really wonderful. There's usually several of the seniors or residents that know how to play the piano or play an instrument. And then like our choir kids or our, instrument kids will go and they'll do like Christmas caroling with the seniors. So the seniors playing the piano or playing a guitar, and the students playing their instrument, and it brings such joy. It costs very little, if anything, to just spend some time with these individuals, because not all of them are going to be fortunate to have guests and visitors, and it's just vitally important that we also educate our children and the next generation on the importance of spending time with seniors, because I feel like you can learn so much from them, but they also can learn a lot from them too.
Yeah. Well, I think of some of the big box stores in terms of how they've implemented changes. Like when the self checkout came, people are like, ah, the seniors and the young kids are like, thank goodness, I've been waiting for this, all my life. But I mean, there's this wide variety. But they didn't just say we're not going to do this anymore. They merged it. They've looked at it again, and some have leaned one way, some have leaned another, depending on what it is they're doing. I think it's I can't remember if it's Sam's or Costco right now is coming out with another huge change for their
I
membership.
think it's Sam's. I know the Sam by us, about a year or two ago, we went in one night to get supplies and things, and the entire row of registers was gone except for
Mhm.
two. The rest were all self checkout. And I go there probably once every couple of weeks, and you can always, without fail, see a senior elderly person trying to figure out, how do I work this thing?
Mhm.
And this might sound, kind of minor, but I don't think it is. They might look forward to visiting with that cashier, just a smile and, how's your day? Just a little back and forth. You're not going to get that from a machine. And not to mention, it takes away people's jobs also.
Well, and even when you put in your credit card, like a lot of times I'll use a debit card versus a credit card, and it'll like, do you want your password? And it's like, no, do I use the red? Do I use and they're all different. It's like, just put a P for pass,
Yeah.
so we know, and that they're consistent within the machines. Those things slow things down. By trying to be different, you're not being helpful. And so really understanding your technology or your purpose in terms of, meeting the needs, so that it is a better experience for people. And it's nice that, they have people, kind of hovering over those self checkouts to support, but they're not always there.
Is there?
Or there's a lot of people that need them, so you have the human glitches, but then you have the machine glitches on top of that. And so, to me, it's just about being prepared and knowing the process, and pulling in the population that you're serving and asking them what works, what doesn't, what do you like, what don't you like, because that's how you serve better. It's not by just making decisions in your little tower when you really haven't interacted, or you haven't even gone through the dang process. That can be very detrimental and very costly to fix those mistakes after the fact. And that doesn't seem to be considered with some of these things, and again, causes more angst where people are fired or laid off, or they're worried about their jobs. And then all of a sudden they're calling them back going, oh, oops, but they can't get a hold of them because they don't have a company email, and they don't really know their other contact information, or it's out of date. I mean, there's just so many little things that matter. And so I would just encourage all businesses and our government to really look into those things, and consider them heavily.
Well, one thing I'll say really quickly as it relates to stores and shopping, I don't know if you had this in your town, Lori, but here during COVID, a lot of our grocery stores had 2 days a week where they opened an hour early, and it was just for senior shopping. So you had to be, 65 or older in order to shop during those times. And I thought that was such a great idea. The seniors don't feel like they're being rushed. They're not in people's way. All the things they might feel during normal hours when you have a full grocery store on the weekend. And I would love to see them just make that a regular thing.
Me too. And,
I
and
just,
people miss that when they took that away
yeah, I just thought that
again.
was incredible. And it was a great idea. And I don't, why only for the pandemic? Why not just make that a regular thing?
Well, I'm surprised insurance companies haven't even looked at that because I would imagine there was less falls and incidents with their seniors during that time as well, when there's more space and more attention and it's quieter. You don't have, all that stimulation and, somebody running by or bumping you. I mean, all of those things create an experience,
Hmm.
for people. And I just, I don't know. I hope things settle down. I just tell my peeps to try not to focus on a lot of this stuff too much because we can't control it.
Right.
And being nervous about it is almost feeding that energy. So even us having this conversation in some ways can drive that energy even more. And that's not our intent. Our intent is to, you know, ask for some calmness and some big picture, I think, leadership in terms of what is happening. I am so proud of people in their departments who have stood up and said, no, this isn't right. This isn't how we serve, and this is why. And some of those people are still being driven off.
Mhm.
But I think we're all being called to talk about this stuff because we will not get the services we need if we don't speak up.
Right. Exactly.
You
More
know,
voices, louder response.
yeah, yeah. So, well, anything else you wanted to talk about? I mean, we could talk about this stuff all day long, but again, we don't want to go down the rabbit hole, and some people probably already thought we did. But I think this is just a really important topic to bring up because, again, when we're caring with our seniors, a lot of times we don't know why they're stressed. Why are they having anxiety? What's driving that? And some of it is just our environment as a whole has changed. And I think of, and again, not to pigeonhole everybody, but a lot of our seniors just have that TV on all day long.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are used to listening to the news. They liked the news. They wanted to know what was going on. But I think of when I was a child to today, boy, it's changed in how things are presented and what is presented,
Yeah.
given the technology and things. And then again, sorting out what is truth.
Right. Absolutely. I would close with just, always thanking you. Always great to see you and have these conversations, Lori, that I think are important. And sometimes they are tough conversations to have, but I think they're needed. And I'll echo, what you said earlier for the viewers and listeners. I'd love to hear their input. Send us a message, send us an email. Let us know what you're experiencing in your area, or what you see is working, maybe not working, and we're all in this together to help support our seniors, and just be there for people, and know that you're not alone.
Thanks, Lance, for having this conversation. And again, to all our peeps, remember you can always make a comment in the format, if it's YouTube or wherever it might be that you find us. We want to hear from you. We want to know your thoughts.
All right.
We're just two of many.
Two of many. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you for joining us again here at Conscious Caregiving with L&L, where we're tackling the tough conversations. We look forward to seeing you again here next month.